Hello there, good morning or good afternoon everybody, depending on where you're dialing in from, and welcome to today's webinar jointly hosted by Search Laboratory and Google. My name is Chris Attewell. I'm the Senior Vice President for the Americas of Search Laboratory. As a bit of an intro, I'm sure everybody's familiar with Google. For those who aren't necessarily familiar with Search Laboratory, we were founded in 2005 as a specialist multilingual PPC agency and grew rapidly to become one of the UK's leading digital marketing agencies, having expanded our service offering to include SEO, social media and programmatic display. Following success in Europe, we opened an office in New York in 2014 in order to better support North American clients, and are now working with around 30 US and Canadian clients, mainly across retail, tech, travel and manufacturing, helping them develop profitable international strategies and successfully delivering paid and organic campaigns in over 40 countries and in 25 different languages. So the goal of the next hour or so is to share some insights into the market opportunity for US companies looking to expand into the UK and Europe. In particular, following the UK's recent decision to leave the EU and some of the subsequent fluctuations we've seen in currency exchange rates since. We'll look at paid advertising and paid search in particular, initially with Andres Valencia and James Nesbitt from Google's global agency support team. So they're going to spend around 20 minutes giving an overview of the global digital landscape and explain how Google supports global clients, as well as providing some insights into the opportunities in paid search that they've seen recently as a result of currency fluctuations. We'll then hear from Search Laboratory's Head of Paid Media, Pete Whitmarsh, who will provide some best practice recommendations on setting up and optimizing global digital campaigns, as well as some PPC insights based on the 10 or so years experience we have of helping clients expand into new markets. So just some general housekeeping points. We do have presenters dialing in from 3 different locations and time zones, so please bear with us if we experience some minor lag time on the slide deck. Hopefully it should work out just fine though. We would love to hear any questions that you have. Please send these via the chat function as we move through the presentations, and we've set aside some time at the end of the webinar, and we'll aim to answer as many of these as we can. And then one final point, we are recording the webinar, and we'll share this out via email in the next 24 hours, so don't worry about trying to frantically take notes or screenshots as we go along. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Andres and James, and they will talk you through some of the solutions that Google can provide and some insights.
Thank you very much, Chris. So hello to everybody. I'm Andres Valencia, and I'm joined here with James Nesbitt, and as Chris mentioned, we're part of the Google agency supporting. So today we were here really just to talk around the whole idea of borderless mentality, borderless thinking, and mainly looking at the export mindset for US and the opportunity arising from the recent decision to leave the EU for the UK. With that being said, I want to pass over to James, who's going to give you a better idea in terms of what we're going to be discussing today and give you a little bit bigger taste around the global digital landscape.
Hi there, my name is James. I'm an agency development manager here at Google, work with Andreas closely on a portfolio, and work with Search Labs a lot too, so really happy to be here today. The agenda, as you can see, encompasses 4 kind of main points, and very briefly those points are going to be that we want to talk about the sort of digital global market. Now obviously the global market is not a new concept, but the piece that we're interested in today is how digital changes that. What sort of extra qualifying characteristics does digital give the global market that is interesting and that allows for greater levels of internationalization at an easy and sort of affordable way. The second piece is going to be a kind of a US market overview to see where the US stands and how the export mindset is increasingly more important in the context of that market. So in other words, how can the US take things to Europe, take things to the UK, take things really anywhere. The third point is going to be about sort of digital opportunities, and you can, obviously talk about digital opportunities or any kind of opportunities, but there are very much a large quantity of digital opportunities amidst the only piece of certainty we truly have, which is uncertainty. So a little sort of pun there, I guess. And then the final piece is going to be a bit about the partnership between Search Laboratory and Google and how Google and Search Laboratory together can help you export and some of the kind of offerings and things that you can access uniquely through Search Laboratory given the support that Google provides to them. So without further ado, we can kick off. The digital global market, what does that really mean? And Andy, feel free to interject at any point as well if you'd like to as well before I hand over to you. But in terms of digital global market, we often refer to markets as kind of standalone entities. That's sort of often how they're thought of. I think that's a sort of economic, hangover, I suppose, from years past. And these singular sort of standalone entities are seen to interact, but not per se to be kind of integrated. I think that is increasingly less true and less relevant. Things really are beginning to integrate, and digital is the sphere in which that's happening sort of the most and foremost. If we look at what tech has done, digital has really allowed us to create and access this concept of a single digital market. So global and single are, I think, two things that we need to start thinking about, and there will be a kind of first mover advantage here to people who want to get into that in a big way. I think we also need to realize that, these days we have everything at our fingertips. So what the digital global market does is put things within reach, literally. I mean, how many people have a smartphone in their pocket that they're able to, go ahead and order whatever they want? Just this morning I bought an Italian coffee maker from Italy in, I'm not kidding, about 45 seconds whilst I was drinking a coffee and pretty much walking up the stairs. So we can trade information, we can trade goods, we can trade services, any of those things with minimum hassle. So really I think what's important here is that barriers are breaking down, and this is really a global phenomenon. What we're seeing is that all industries, all markets, all verticals are, exporting and flying to new markets. So as an Irishman, obviously we have a large history of cattle farming and, to a certain extent export, but it was pretty small. But really to the UK only, I think is about the only place we ever exported our cattle. But nowadays, there's a brand new Irish startup company I learned about yesterday who are actually exporting cattle to Mexico, if you can believe such a thing. So there is this increasing level of kind of internationalization and an increasing ease with which one can avail of that internationalization and profit from it. So, I mean, I don't know who in the realm of Irish farming would have thought that digital, that, smartphones and computers would have allowed for the easing and, lubrication of that distribution, but that is certainly happening now in some of the most unlikely and, of course, the more likely sort of markets or verticals that you might expect. If we look at digitalization and we look at markets and what digitalization really means for markets, yes, of course, the US is absolutely huge, 549, North America, including Canada, where I lived for 3 years. Let's not forget about America's hat, joke. But obviously the US is huge. But really, I mean, looking at it in a more general sense, the European market is almost 500 billion on its own. If we look at APAC, Eastern Europe, there are so many large $100 billion markets out there. And what the digitalization of these markets is doing is essentially, to put not too fine a point on it, uncapping trillions of dollars. So what we're here to do today is to try and help you learn how to exploit this ease of use and this digitalization that is happening in order to get into these big markets such as Europe. I think one of the most important things about the internet, and this is not going to be, this is a slightly kind of water is wet slide in terms of the actual title itself of the internet being borderless, but that is very important. And I mean, stepping outside the realm of e-commerce and sort of profit for a second, obviously with what's happening in the world today, the internet is allowing people to share information in times of crisis. It's really becoming perhaps the most important tool that people have in areas of crisis, wherever it might be. And of course, in sort of happier locations and happier times, it's allowing us to connect. It's allowing us to talk to each other, to interact, to keep track of family and friends, and of course, for businesses to reach customers, be they existing or potential, or even people who have no idea that they might be a qualified customer, and reach those people. 2016, we're looking at about, half of the global population, a little bit more than that, being online. The projection for 2021 is that significantly more than sort of 80–85% of the world's population are going to be online on the internet. So I don't know if anyone believes they can afford to miss that, but I think those are pretty compelling stats on their own. So this is one of our few big compelling number slides I think we produced today, but pretty good. Actually, on the subject of big compelling number slides, I think what we're seeing is obviously steady growth in e-commerce over the years. We're projected in 2018 for $1 trillion to have been added to what is an already extremely sizable sum back in 2014. It's another $500 billion from today between now and kind of 2018. What this is going to do is have a direct impact on the US market as far as an export lens goes. What I mean when I say lens is we look at the US market and look at it from the point of view of exporting things from the US into Europe or into other markets. That's what I mean by an export lens. That $500 billion, that $1 trillion is definitely not something that we want to miss out on. So What I'm going to do now is hand over to Andres, who is our export lead, and he's going to talk us through some of the top-line trends that we're seeing.
Thank you very much for that, James. So as James briefly discussed, it's really talking about how can we uncap this global e-commerce market and really looking at that from a kind of export cross-border point of view. So keeping in mind this idea that by 2018 we're going to have a $2.5 trillion market, what we really want to understand is out of that $2.5 trillion market, what is actually driving growth, and mainly what can we be doing around uncapping that particular market. So first thing we want to kind of highlight is really looking at what is the growth driver, and what we're seeing is that cross-border online trading is the rapid growth driver of e-commerce growth. So take aside China, we're going to be looking at the United States as the second biggest online exporter, and it's projected that unlike global e-commerce as a whole, which is seeing a very, very steady, slow annual growth rate, it's the cross-border trade that's actually growing at a very fast pace, so 30% year on year. So by the time we get to 2020, we're looking at a market that is in excess of $20 billion. Now, we are the second biggest, largest online exporter, and that is to do with the fact that we've uncapped all digital strategies and digital technology. So right now it's just a matter of understanding what else can we be doing as digital advertisers to enter new markets, how can we be supporting you there, and what else can be done. So if we take a little deeper look into the United States as an exporter, we can actually see that, of course, the vast majority of exports are going to North America. So your likes of Canada is the biggest source of export, and aside from that, we're going to be looking at China and all the other APAC countries as the second biggest source of export. But the reality is, if we key in into the kind of third biggest growth driver of export, we're going to be looking at EU and UK markets there, which actually amount to 20% of all US exports. So if we're talking around this $20 billion market, we're actually looking at the 4% mark in terms of how much export we can be driving there. So what I want to kind of have a good idea is really understanding why are we here today. So why are we having this conversation around digitalization, the power of export, and why the US should be looking at expanding there. And that is basically a situational thing. We've seen a lot of recent talks around what may be happening in the UK, in the EU around Brexit, but many people have faded off the idea of how can other countries, such as the United States, be taking an opportunistic approach towards finding opportunities to grow in these particular markets. So with that being said, we want to talk a little about the digital opportunity for the US amidst this market uncertainty, and what kind of trends or what kind of insights can we be driving there for you guys to actually grow. So as we know, the referendum impacted quite heavily the UK, EU economy. Not only those two, but actually had a knock-on effect on the US economy. Now, the knock-on effect wasn't nowhere near as big as it was on these two particular ones. And if we take a look at two kind of index markets there, so we look at the FTSE 100 and German DAX, we actually saw a pretty heavy hit on both of these markets. Now, as a consequent effect of this, what we noted was that local currencies also were severely affected. So we talk about the pound to the dollar. We saw a over 20-year low in terms of the British pound against the dollar, and a similar story towards the euro. Now, as I said, this is impacting a lot of the local economies in the UK and EU, but it's actually opening probably the biggest window of opportunity when we're talking about the growth for these markets. Now, we're going to take a different look and just think about the actual lens from a UK advertising standpoint and UK search volume traffic, right? So what we actually did here is we did a little bit of a deep dive analysis in terms of some of the top three verticals that we have. So that's retail and apparel, consumer electronics, and travel and tourism. I just wanted to analyze what kind of trends in traffic behavior did we see on the week leading up to and the week thereafter of the EU referendum. And what we actually noticed was that there was around a 5% dip in traffic, but everything normalized the week thereafter. So in other words, there was a little bit of uncertainty in terms of search volume traffic, a little bit of uncertainty in terms of what was actually going to happen. There was a spike and some troughs in terms of volume and actual activity, but the reality was it did normalize thereafter. Now, if we look at the other end of the scale and what we talked about before, so the kind of in-market impact, which is the currency fluctuation, what we noticed was that the actual impact to UK advertising costs from a US standpoint, we actually saw a CPC price drop of around 13%. What does that mean? If your billing address was not in the UK, but it was actually in the US, you actually saw a direct benefit from the currency fluctuations both to pounds and to euros in terms of your overall potential of advertising costs. In layman's terms, we can say the UK market and the EU market became ever more accessible, cheaper, and actually provides a lot of opportunity. So if we're actually just to wrap this up into kind of two fantastic consequences which are going to favor our US export to digital means, we have to put it in two key ways. As I mentioned before, something that we keep on hammering down, it's the idea of currency fluctuations. So we're seeing a strengthening dollar against both the two leading currencies, the the pound and the euro, which has made this ad space ever more affordable, ever easier to enter the ad space. And that actually combines as well with, let's say, the kind of mentality of frugal ad spend. So local economy, United Kingdom economists, take that as an example, what they're going to be seeing is they're going to be seeing a lot of strap and a lot of scrutiny around spend. So our marketing budgets in these situations tend to be reduced, and there has to be a little bit of conscious spend in this uncertain period, which means that frugal ad spend actually provides a little bit less competitiveness in terms of ad space as well, which is, again, a secondary reason why it might be a good time for us to actually be exploring entering these key markets. With that being said, we also want to talk about our partnership with SearchLab and how Google can help you and alongside SearchLab export. So before we actually delve into how we can help you, it's probably a good idea to give you an understanding in terms of the Google agency export model. So the way that we work around these things is we have three key kind of pillars that are driving our export model. The first one is identification of new opportunities. So this is very much a market analysis approach in which we look at organic search volume, we look at digital trends, and try to pinpoint which of the markets that are probably showing a lot of interest outside your home market, which might be interesting to tackle as potential export opportunities. The second pillar there is looking at engage, so engaging the audience, which actually means understanding a little bit more about the market. So understanding socioeconomic behaviors, understanding implications of digital trends, digital behaviors, and trying to get a better sense of how will we enter the market and if that market is ready for entry for our particular industry and vertical. And the final thing, which is, again, one of the areas where we work very closely with Search Labs, is the whole idea of execution and use strategy. So once we've scoped out ideal markets, once we've had a better grasp around this audience, is how can we leverage our knowledge and actually tackle this through and make it into something where you guys can succeed in these markets with expertise and know-how. So what we thought we'd do for this latter part of the session would be just to give you a little bit of a practical understanding in terms of how we would go about each one of these pillars, starting off with identify. So for this particular sense, we anonymize the name of our client, but what we've done here is a top-line analysis in terms of understanding for the client what would be the organic demand outside the United States. Now again, very, very market prospecting point of view in terms of overall page sessions, and again, we would layer this with things like session durations, looking at organic, additional organic traffic and paid traffic, and benchmarking against industry, but what we can actually tell here is there seem to be two key markets there that might be interesting, one being the United Kingdom and Australia, both on the basis that they're same language destinations, as we mentioned, the UK being a currency advantageous opportunity, but then even looking further down the kind of tail of this particular market prospect, and we can see some other interesting markets. Again, looking at the EU specifically, we have Spain and the Netherlands. Now, let's say hypothetically speaking, we would have pinpointed these four markets as market opportunities. What we want to then do is try to get a better grasp in terms of what's actually happening there, right? And what we want to do off the back of that is really understand, as I said, socioeconomic, understanding digital trends, understanding penetration of internet to get a better grasp as to what strategy we would implement. And for that, we would look at the engaged aspects, understanding an audience. Now again, because the UK and the US have relatively similar trends in terms of overall internet penetration and consumption of digital patterns, we actually decided to take a little bit of a curveball there and go for Spain. So again, EU-based country. If we look from a socio-economical standpoint, we know that they are also suffering from the single currency weakness. Again, impact of Brexit on the currency trend, which is taking a toll on the euro. Now, if we look at kind of some of the other pictures that we want to be drawing here is looking at things like e-commerce penetration, the growth of e-commerce penetration in Spain, which means that the population is catching up there, but the market itself, even though it's prone to cross-border transactions, the market itself hasn't necessarily caught up with all platforms to become an attractive market for e-commerce yet, which actually gives a big advantage to any advertiser, whether it's UK, US, any other EU advertiser to enter if they already have a solid and sturdy e-commerce platform. Another thing worthwhile mentioning there is looking at kind of activities on a cross-device basis. So what we actually noticed there is that Spain is seeing a huge increase in mobile shopping activities. Now again, this is the kind of information we want to piece together, but what we're seeing is if there's a kind of big push for e-commerce and mobile shopping activities, what would be advisable is looking at whether we have the capabilities to do both e-commerce and mobile shopping activities, and whether we're able to compete and enter this market on the basis of understanding this consumer behavior. We have a better idea around there. The next thing we want to look at an engagement standpoint is actually looking from a Google standpoint which markets are attractive in terms of competitiveness. Now, here at Google, we look at competitiveness on three different bases. First thing is looking at the cost aspect. For us, cost is looking at Google CPC. So what is the average cost per click to actually click on one of our ads? The second core metric there is Google query depth. And I think this is probably one that's worthwhile mentioning a little bit more in depth, but query depth is a level of competition. So in other words, when somebody queries a particular inquiry onto Google search, it's how many ads would be queuing up on that auction for that particular ad space. The lower the query depth, the less competitive the market is. And finally, looking at query volume. So how many queries are happening in these individual markets? Now, if we take a look at this chart, as I mentioned, we brought in some of those key markets we discussed in the first slide in terms of identify. We can see that the United Kingdom, although it has a smaller volume than the United States in terms of query volume, it's actually a little bit cheaper in terms of CPCs. And probably worthwhile mentioning that these CPCs are still inflated as they have not factored in the Brexit incidents. Funnily enough, if we look at Germany, again, query competition is a little bit lower. CPC is about the same as the UK, so we're already moving in the right direction. However, we're looking at markets where it might be extremely interesting, so really top opportunities for looking at export. We can look at some of those EU markets where we have the likes of Netherlands and Spain with much lower query costs and also query competition. And again, the volume, although not as big as these markets, it's still big enough for us to be able to giving it a shot in terms of advertising and exporting into these markets. Now again, this is just a sample analysis for one of our clients. This is the kind of support that we can be providing via Search Lab to all advertisers in terms of trying to understand what are the different or what are the potential markets per vertical, per type of clients. And of course then comes the lighter part, the final part, which is really once we've scoped out key markets for you, how can we go ahead and enter these markets? And I think the key thing there is really leveraging the partnership between Search Lab and Google and really going the extra mile and talking about the localization services that we can provide for desired markets you want to export. So I won't step over Pete's feet here in terms of his knowledge and really talking about what Search Lab has done in terms of localization when it comes to export, but just as a kind of add-on, Google additionally supports Search Lab in terms of localization services, making sure that the campaigns are localized, all the keywords, all the relevant ad text is catered to the home language. As I said, it's really the kind of bespoke access that we provide to specialist agencies like Search Lab so that we can develop and help you develop and expand your international strategy. So with that being said, I did want to just pass back to James to kind of give us a little bit of a wrap-up in terms of what we've discussed today and really kind of pinpoint key takeaways in terms of what's going to happen.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andreas. So the internet is borderless. We're looking at sort of digitalization as a channel, and really as a channel, it's a continuous stream to constantly promote growth activity. Off the back of that, we're seeing this huge surge in growth of cross-border e-commerce through digital, so doing that through the digital lens. And we're going to see, obviously, that the US market is actually the second leading exporter at the moment, and the cross-border trade is growing at a sort of 5x clip. In terms of the third point, this tees us up to kind of leverage the lower cost of entry into the UK. So we're looking at lower competing ad spends and favorable currency fluctuations in terms of like a lower sort of cost of entry there. And then finally this piece around the export services which Google offers select partners like Search Labs that can only be accessed through a partnership with Search Labs, or Search Laboratory, sorry. So, you know, it's the sort of the 4 points there. I'm going to pass back now to Peter Whitmarsh, who's going to give you an overview of the kind of export services and expertise that Search Laboratory offers, and then some of the UK and EU market know-how and how the UK is a good bridge to Europe along with success stories and next steps. So, Pete, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Andreas and James. Really, really interesting insight there. I'm sure everyone will agree in terms of some of the market trends that we're seeing at the moment and some of the ways we can actually analyse that and look for opportunities. So coming on to my part, I guess Andreas and James have really teed up the sort of why now and why now is a good time to actually look at export. I'm going to be focusing a bit more on the practical aspects of it, I suppose. So just to actually introduce myself properly, I'm Pete Whitmarsh. I'm head of paid media at Search Laboratory. I've been with the company for over 6 years now, and my role is really overseeing everything we do from a paid point of view, so PPC, display, video advertising, social advertising, etc. And as Chris mentioned, we are a truly global agency. We're working with clients all around the world in multiple languages, and we've got over 10 years experience of actually delivering these services. Just to give a quick snapshot of some of the clients we work with as well, we work across all verticals. That's kind of the main point that I want to prove here is we are actually vertical agnostic. We will help you out whatever vertical you're in because the kind of raw services that we offer don't really change depending on the vertical. So just kicking off, I suppose following on from what James and Andreas were sharing there, I just want to share some further facts and figures about international markets. So this is kind of a global view of cost per clicks in the USA, but then other markets. So the far right here is USA, and this is just taking a normalized graph, so assuming that the USA is 1 and everything else is a percentage of that. You can see actually the UK cost per clicks are significantly cheaper than the US, but then across the rest of Europe there are some really, really big gains to be had. So France in particular, it's the 3rd biggest economy in Europe, but the cost per click on average is only about 36-37% of what you pay in the USA. So huge, huge opportunities there if you can get those clicks for a fraction of the cost. This graph shows the actual percentage of retail which is conducted online in each of these different countries. So this is as a percentage of all retail that happens in these countries, what percentage actually happens online. So you can see here the UK is actually the leader here with over 15% of all retail happening online. US is second in the line there. And then the rest of Europe, it varies quite a lot actually. So Germany is quite strong at almost 12%. France and the Netherlands are also pretty strong. Italy and Spain lagging behind a little bit at the moment, but really what we're seeing is every year these numbers are increasing. There's certainly no reason why Italy and Spain wouldn't be at the same level as the UK and the US in years to come. I also want to share with you some of the reasons why people don't buy from overseas. So this is from a Google tool called Consumer Barometer. There's loads of information in there. It's always worth having a look in whenever you're looking at different markets. And these are some of the top reasons why people would not want to buy from overseas. So in France, their top reason for not buying from foreign sites is just simply that they don't trust foreign sites. So if you're wanting to enter the French market, a big factor that you should look to overcome is trust. Think about how you can establish your brand as a trustworthy brand that people will actually want to interact with. Second in the list is that people in France say they've already got sites in their own country that meet their needs, so therefore you need to think about what are your selling points, what can you do to really stand out against the competition and make the French population believe that your service is worth investing in because nothing in their own country does meet those needs. The French also have concerns about customer service, so again make sure that you set up in the right way to address any customer service concerns and can actually help people out in their native language ideally. I'll just share Spain as well. There's loads of information in the tool, but I just picked out these two. Spain, their top reason is simply that it never occurred to them. It's probably quite hard to overcome that one, to be totally honest. But the second one on the list is that they are fearful that returns would be costly and difficult. So yeah, if you're advertising to Spain, make sure you're very clear and upfront about what the returns policy is and really think about how you would allow Spanish customers to return the products. Spanish also cited customer service concerns as a reason they might not want to buy from overseas. So that brings us on to why paid search really. So Andreas and James have kind of told us all about the why now, but why is paid search what we're talking about? Why should that be a primary channel that you're looking at whenever you're looking to export to a new country? Well, these are the reasons really. So firstly, paid search is fantastic for getting immediate exposure. So it's actually fairly quick, fairly simple, and fairly low cost to set up a paid search campaign on AdWords or any other platform. And what that means is you can immediately start driving relevant traffic to your website. Remember, these are people who are actively looking for your products on a search engine and kind of looking to transact. So it's simple and low cost to actually start driving relevant traffic. It's also very high performing, so compared to most advertising channels, PPC is going to perform better. There's sort of no two ways about it really. So if PPC doesn't work, then to be honest, other marketing probably won't work and you're probably not going to succeed in that country. So it's a good way of kind of understanding if your other marketing channels will actually work as well as PPC and if you should expand your offering in that country. PPC is also a fantastic platform for testing, so you can really control your budgets, control the amount of traffic that you're getting through to a website and use that as use that kind of traffic base as a bit of a testing platform to understand how people interact with the website, for example. So coming on to how to discover new markets, Andreas kind of briefly touched on some of Google's tools there. I wanted to share one other Google tool, which is actually a free tool which anyone can access, called the Google Global Market Finder. So the way this tool works is that you would go in, you choose your country, you choose your language, you then choose a keyword. So in this example I've used the keyword of tent, so if we're looking to sell tents online, and then you choose the countries that you actually are interested in. And the way that this tool works is it's going to translate your list of keywords into different languages, and it's going to establish for you what are the search volumes and other search benchmarks in those countries. So you get an output that looks something like this, where you see the name of a country, you see an opportunity score, and then you've got the local monthly search volume, the recommended bid price, and the competition level. So here you can see Spain atop of the list because there's a good amount of search volume and there's a low amount of competition. So that really suggests that this is a real opportunity for you. I would just say, and I'll come on to this in a bit more detail later, this tool does occasionally, it's normally very good, but it does occasionally highlight why you should be very careful when translating anything. And when I expand out this Spanish and the Italian one at the bottom as well, you get a couple of words here that it's showing have got search volume and low competition, but actually this Spanish word here, tienda, means store or shop, so it can also mean tent, but that's not the best translation really, so you do just need to be a little bit careful. The Italian one at the bottom there means curtain. Again, it can mean tent in the right context, but most people searching for that would be looking for curtains. So yeah, it is a very good tool. Just be a little bit cautious with it. The output's only ever going to be as good as your input, and you need to just make sure that that you are verifying that there is a real opportunity before kind of relying on this as gospel. So that brings us on how to actually enter a new market. So what do you physically do when you want when you've decided this is the market I want to enter? What are the first steps that you'd take? The one thing that I'd really like to emphasize is a big part of international success is about thinking globally but acting locally. So it's really about convincing someone that you're either from their country or that you at least know, respect and can service their needs in their country, so that really you can act as a genuine like-for-like player against a local service provider, because otherwise it could be quite a big barrier if people see that you're an American company and there's already companies in their own country that are established to provide the same service, then why would they go with you really? So think on a local level and make sure you service them on a local level. And I use the word localized a lot, and really at Search Laboratory we try and steer away from the word translation, because translation just means doing a direct sort of mirror image of kind of one thing to another, whereas localization is really understanding a culture, understanding what someone's needs are and catering to those needs. So the first steps that you should really take is making sure you're localizing, and there's that word again, make sure you're localizing the logistics. So payment methods vary throughout Europe. The UK is very similar to the US in that it tends to be credit cards or PayPal, but in Germany, for example, a lot of payments are done via invoice. Ideal there is the Netherlands preferred payment solution. So loads of countries use different payment methods, so make sure you understand what they are and can service in those. Shipping methods are equally important as well as taxation, customer service, things like that. So just make sure the business is set up to actually deal in these countries and languages. The second thing is localizing your website. So we get the question time and time again of, can we just send traffic, say send Spanish traffic to an English website? And really the answer is no, it's not going to work for you. Even if it does work a little bit, it's not going to work as well as if you do actually localize that website. So we would always say you want to localize the content, put it in the correct language, and as well as the language, again, consider again what are the barriers to entry, what are the reasons why people might not buy from you, and be very upfront about kind of how you tackle those. Also, of course, with the website, you need to think about considerations such as purchasing a new domain or a subdomain or a subfolder on the website. Do you want to just localize a single page or a microsite, or do you want to do the whole site? And think as well about trust and credibility signals. It's definitely a big barrier when you're entering new countries to build up that trust and rapport with the local market. So think about what you can do, whether that's awards that you've won or reviews that you've acquired or anything else that you can do to make yourself actually a trustworthy provider in those markets. And then one thing that you should always do is assess the competition. So actually have a look, just do some searches yourself on Google and see who else is advertising on the kind of terms that you would want to advertise on, and what are their selling points, how do they tend to market themselves and position themselves, and how should you really position yourself against them. So it might be in the US you're using a certain selling point as kind of your headline statistic or your headline reason why people would come to you, but in other countries you might need to change that message around a little bit. So further on localization, I'm just going to talk through each of these things in a little bit more detail, but things like language, images, currency, address, sizing of products, thinking about the metric system, selling points, as we just discussed there. These are all things that should be considered when you're localizing a website and localizing an advertising campaign. It's not just the language, which is what most people think about. But on language, firstly, yeah, as I say, localize everything. Even if you're exporting to Britain, there are things that you need to change about the language on your website, and it is pretty obvious as a British person when you're dealing with an American website and you can see that they're not really catering and not really tailoring their website entirely to a British audience. These are just a few examples of words that are different in British English to American English. Of course, another one that you need to be a little bit careful of is the spelling of words. So localize, actually in the UK, that's spelled with a Z, so I've had to be very careful throughout this presentation to make sure I put my Zs in all the right places. So yeah, this really refers to whether you're translating a website or keywords or ad text or anything else really. The next point is around keyword selection. So if you're thinking about doing a PPC campaign, please don't just translate your English keyword list, because if you do that, you're going to end up with some irrelevant keywords, as we saw with the tent example. You're going to end up missing out on really prime keywords. You're probably also going to end up with a poor structure in your AdWords account, because you'll get sort of keywords grouped in together that shouldn't be grouped in together. So yeah, you should never just translate a keyword list. And people do search in different ways in different countries as well. So yeah, they might not search in the exact same way in a different country as they would in the US. So yeah, what we do, our approach would always be researching the PPC strategy and the keywords that would be relevant in each country that we enter, and kind of doing that exercise from the ground up rather than starting with an English set of keywords and trying to work backwards from there. When it comes to ads, so ad text on Google, again, really you need to build these from scratch, because if you translate them, then this is what happens. These are some English ads here on the left. If you translate those to German, anyone who's familiar with Google AdWords ads will immediately see these are way over the character limits. So yeah, that's kind of one consideration is character limits, but again, you should really be thinking about what are your actual unique selling points, the trust signals, what's important to the culture that you're advertising in. So other cultural considerations, again, making sure you get the message right. Something like saying get 50% off buy now, that's quite a typical message in the US and in the UK, but in a lot of other countries and other cultures that would be considered actually quite aggressive, so you'd need to think about how you can tone that down and actually soften the impact of that. Designed and manufactured in the US, certainly if you're selling in the US, that's going to be a great selling point. Selling across a lot of Europe, that's probably going to be a fair selling point as well, but there might be certain countries that get put off by that. You know, certain countries might not like US design as much as design from their own country, for example. So again, think about and test these kind of messages. Are they actually getting you a positive impact? A more obvious one, great gifts for Christmas there. Obviously, if you're advertising to a kind of non-Christian country, then that wouldn't be a very good message to show. I briefly mentioned images earlier on the list of localization considerations. This is one thing that people often overlook, but this is a video conferencing service that we used to work with. Here on the left is their US landing page, and you can see on the screen there's these images of people sort of celebrating in front of their video conferencing machine. However, when we localize this into France, we very quickly realized that actually in France that image just wouldn't be considered appropriate at all. People wouldn't celebrate in the office. It'd seem a bit silly for people to be doing that in front of a video conference. So when we localized that into France, we used a much more toned down image that was much more relevant to their culture. This can go wrong, and a lot of big companies get this wrong as well, which sometimes has quite amusing consequences. So for example, when KFC actually entered the Chinese market, they tried to translate their slogan of finger licking good, and that somehow translated into eat your own fingers in China. So not quite sure how they managed that one, but yeah, that's where it can go wrong. Another example is a Swedish vacuum cleaner company called Electrolux. When they first entered the English markets, this was the slogan that they run with. So nothing sucks like an Electrolux. Again, good example of why you need to be careful and why you can't just translate what you've got in your own language. So finally, I just wanted to share some stories of clients who've done this well, that we've helped out with doing this. So firstly, I want to talk about Norgren. These are a B2B manufacturer of small parts for machines and for engineers. We actually started off with them about 4 years ago with a very small PPC test in Finland, just to kind of prove whether it could work or not. And we had success in Finland, so they've gradually rolled out to more and more countries over the years. And these are the results that we've got for them. So on this graph you can see the blue bars are the number of conversions per year, and the yellow line is the cost per conversion per year. So seeing consistent improvements in both of those metrics every year. We're now up to 27 different Google accounts, 2 Bing accounts, 1 Baidu account, so each of those Google accounts are for a different language. Yeah, year-on-year improvements, as I mentioned, but also improvements to the lead quality over time. So initially they were getting some quite poor quality leads that weren't turning into sales, whereas we've improved on that as well as the number of leads. And this really wouldn't have been possible for them without expanding into those new markets. The second one I want to share was Hootsuite. So if you're not familiar with them, these are a social media monitoring and analytics piece of software. We started working with those in 2 countries, just in Germany and Spain. We're now operating with them in 7 countries. And one key thing to note with this is that they actually previously had translated campaigns. So the campaigns that they were running before we took over were very symptomatic of just being directly translated. So there's some slightly awkward messaging in the ad text. Some of the keywords kind of missed the mark, and they missed out on some prime keywords that they should have been bidding on. And the results for them, this is over 22 months of activity. Each one of these bars is a month. You can see how that has increased over time. So the number of sign-ups has increased over time, and cost per sign-up has reduced over time. So really, really positive results. And again, this wouldn't have been possible for them if we'd just stuck with Germany and Spain. The real kind of thing that unlocked this success for us and for Hootsuite was actually expanding into new territories and trying new markets. So finally, I just wanted to share some next steps. So whether you're at the stage of just being a little bit interested in international, or whether you're already doing this or at least seriously considering it, I'm sure there's some way that that SearchLab and Google can help out with this. So firstly, if you're kind of right at the beginning of that journey, we can help you to find which countries would be best based on your market, based on the competition, based on the kind of other things that people are doing out there. We can also provide a more sort of detailed market entry report for you. So this would be really looking in depth at different trends, competitors' strategies, social media strategies, barriers to entry for users, any potential hiccups in terms of language, stuff like that. We can provide a full report on that. And then, of course, we can also help with the setup of PPC campaigns, as well as display, social and SEO campaigns, and the ongoing management of PPC, display, social and SEO. So if you've already got a campaign in foreign language that you're keen for us to take a bit of a look into and give an assessment, then we'd be more than happy to actually take a look at that for you. So that's everything from me. Hopefully there's been plenty of questions that you've been sending in throughout these slides. So I'm going to hand back over to Chris now to actually host those questions for us.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Yeah, just conscious of time. I mean, we do have a fair few questions. I think we can probably get through a couple of the first ones that came through. There's one question that came through, which was just to pick up on the points that you were mentioning there about translation, Pete. The question is how do you actually do this if you're not translating? I think maybe to get a bit more insight into the actual process of creating a campaign in a new language if you're not using translation resources or just translating directly.
Sure, yeah. So the method that we have is we have an international team in-house and some outsourced partners that we trust and work with as well. And these people are all trained up in PPC, in working with Google AdWords or their own search engines if they're in some other markets. And yeah, these people are responsible rather than translating a campaign. Basically, they would have no English benchmark to work from. They would just be starting off afresh in their own language, doing the research, doing exactly the same style of research that we would be doing if we were starting off a campaign in English, and really using that to understand how people will actually be searching for those products in their own language. So yeah, it's kind of a long process that we go through to actually train these people up and to make sure that they are able to do this research and build up those keyword lists on their own.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Pete. There was another question for the team at Google, for Andreas and for James. I think it's asking for additional stats, data, or insights that Google can provide to show opportunity in global markets. I know you touched on some of them, and Pete mentioned the free Market Finder tool. What kind of tools can people get access to that you guys have for finding markets?
Thank you very much for that question, guys. As we mentioned, what we tend to do is look at both internal and external data. So if we kind of take that question from the internal standpoint, it's very much looking at market-specific, either market-specific trends, so what kind of query volume are we looking, what particular keywords are trending, what are the main trending subjects around our particular business offering, then looking more granularly at our ad auction metrics, so we can do, aside from what we talked about, competitiveness based on ad coverage and ad depth and cost of entry via CPCs. We can also look at actual other auction metrics such as click-through rates, just typical conversion costs and whatnot. So we can get a lot more granular data around those particular things from an internal standpoint. Now, looking at external tools, we work with a lot of close partnerships with the likes of Euromonitor, eMarketer, Hitwise. So this is the kind of data that you're going to be able to access via SearchLab, as they are one of our preferred agencies, in terms of us providing you more insights there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And how can people access these insights and stats and reports that you have, Andreas?
Yeah. So broadly speaking, there, as I mentioned, it's very much around the lines of once we've scoped out a couple of markets that we would like to enter, it's putting through a request through SearchLab, in which SearchLab will communicate to us, and then we can feed back all these internal and external insights.
Okay, fantastic. I suppose, just conscious of time, I'll wrap up from there. Thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully you found the insights interesting and useful, and you can go away and apply some of that knowledge to your own campaigns. Do feel free to get in touch if you have any specific questions about your particular industry or any of the countries that you'd like to target. We'd love to discuss how we can help support your global campaigns and share any additional insights that we have that could help you to achieve your goals. So do enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining, and we look forward to catching up very soon. Thank you.